Okay, we're going to get started here. I'm just going to start with a few brief introductions. My name is Lynn Haydu. I'm the organizer of this event and the project administrator of the Building CS Capacity in New Jersey project, which is a grant project out of TCNJ's Center for Excellence in STEM. This is a 3-year project funded by the Martinson Family Foundation, whose goal it is to basically expand computer science in New Jersey. We do it through various methods, one of which is offering free PD sessions to both new and veteran computer science teachers alike who wish to brush up on skills, learn a new course, or maybe help expand their program by adding in some extracurriculars in the theme of computer science. So one such extracurricular would be a CS STEAM summer camp. So that brings me to our presenter this evening. Our presenter is Gary Hull, and Gary has been a computer science teacher at Spotswood High School for the last 14 years, and in that time he has increased the Spotswood CF's offerings, rewritten curriculum, and grown the program into one that prepares students to create instead of just consume. Gary is an active member of both the CSTA of Central New Jersey and the CSNJ advocacy groups, and has presented at several state-level conferences on computer science education. In 2016, Gary and a co-worker developed the Spotswood Summer STEAM Camp, a summer camp with offerings in programming, robotics, and animation television production. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight. So, Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yeah, just wanted to start by saying I am by no means an expert in STEAM summer camps. This was the first time that we had ever done this, but I think it gives me a good perspective on what someone starting out should look for, should look at, and any kind of gotchas that might come up along the way. So that's kind of what this presentation is about. So there we go. So here's the agenda. And obviously, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. This is very informal. The first part of this presentation is going to look at the logistics. So kind of the answering all the questions, the hows, whats, whys, whens, all of that stuff. I'd say probably the most important piece is going to be next, which is looking at the schedule and how that was put together and what that looks like. It's also included as a handout, as is this presentation. And I should also say, please feel free to email me here at ghull@spsd.us if you ever have any questions. I'll do my best to share any document that I have with you or answer any questions that you might have. Next on the agenda, I'll go over the budget, take a look at what money came in, what money went out, and how much money we were left with, if anything, when it was all over and said and done. Go through the employees, who we had working for us and with us, how many people we thought we needed, and how many people we actually needed. We'll take a look at these supplies. So things that we either bought or used that we already had, that I think were necessary to run a successful camp. Little things to keep in mind, kind of things that we might not have thought about until the last minute, or things we didn't think about at all until it actually started. Almost at the last bullet point, before that one, we got surveys and results. So 2 surveys that were sent out, one to all the campers at the end of the camp, and one to all of the parents at the end of the camp, and just taking a look at some of the questions that we asked and the results that we got back. And finally, what did we learn and what questions do we still have going forward? Because we do hope to have this camp on a yearly basis. So we just sent out the registration materials probably 1 or 2 weeks ago, and we've gotten back some responses so far, but you know, we're nowhere. I think May will be a very busy month for us in tallying up the responses. So let's get started. So the logistics. We start out with why. Why on earth did we even start to do this camp? So this camp was developed by myself and my friend at work. His name is Martin Dempsey. He is a physics teacher. We had always been discussing the idea of a camp. We also run an after-school club called Hackspace, and we'd gotten some kids interested in computer science and STEAM-related activities through that. we'd always toyed around with the idea, but we'd never, I don't know, either sat down and had the time to do it or thought it was the right time to do it. But a couple of things were in our favor. We had a superintendent who was very technology friendly, and one of his 11 bullet points at the beginning of his tenure was to get a summer camp with STEAM started at the school. So that was the first initiative. And the second thing is we have an existing summer program. It's called CARES. It's an after-school program, but they also do a summer camp for children. And they typically have the last 2 weeks of summer off. So they're not running a camp. So parents are scrambling around at that time looking for options for their children. And we thought it was a natural fit to put us in there. So right after CARES summer camp, kids could transition into the STEAM summer camp if they so chose to do. So we had a 2-week window. We had a superintendent who was willing to do it, and we thought we had most of the major pieces that we needed as far as technology and curriculum. So we figured, why not try it out? The where was a little bit tricky because we are both high school teachers. So obviously we thought, well, we'll have it at the high school. Unfortunately, this past summer is when they were doing a lot of the referendum items like construction on the roof, etc., and there was no way that the high school was going to be inhabitable by 40 to 50 kids and 8 counselors and 3 adults or 4 adults. So we had to look for other options, and luckily for us, the other option that came up was our middle school. Our middle school is literally 500 feet away from our high school. It has 2 computer labs, or at least a computer lab and a media center. It has a mobile computer cart. It has a cafeteria which can easily fit at least 200 kids in it, and we had the option of using that. The only problem with that is that there was no air conditioning in certain rooms, so the computer lab was actually not air conditioned during that time, but we had to take what we can get, and so we went to the middle school, and like I said earlier, we used the cafeteria, the computer lab, and we used the media center, and we used a mobile computing cart as well. So that was the where. The when, already kind of covered that. The when was the last 2 weeks of summer, just because that's when the CARE summer camp was ending. So we slid right into that. I will say though, with the when, we initially thought that, well, we'll put it out there for 2 weeks and we'll see what kind of interest that we get back. We had a ton of interest in the first week and not so much interest in the second week. So we rolled some of the campers over who could actually do it from the second week to the first week, and we canceled the second week. So we had to refund about, I would say, 5 people, and we actually just ran it with 1 week, and that was in the first week. How many and what grades you can see on the screen. So we had a total of 48 campers. 43 of them were paying, 5 of them were children of employees of the camp, so they got camp for free. A fairly small population of second and third graders, 11 of them, 15 fourth and fifth graders, and 22 sixth through eighth graders. So that was our biggest population. Sadly, we didn't have as many girls as we would have liked. We had 41 boys and 7 girls. Hopefully that will get better next year as the girls go back and tell other people about it. We made some adjustments in the camp to try and, well, I would say it's just one major adjustment, and this was not necessarily an adjustment, just something we thought of ahead of time, which I'll touch on later, to try and make the girls in the camp more comfortable and hopefully go back and tell other girls about it so that they would be interested in joining this summer. The how much part was $250 a camper, and that was for week 1 and week 2. Sorry, for week 1, week 2 would have been an additional $250. So it was $250 a week. We got that figure. We did some break-even analysis just to figure out, okay, if these are our expenses and we kind of guesstimate on having this many campers, can we, how much can we charge? but ultimately it came down to charging exactly what the CARE summer camp charged for their weeks. So we essentially stole that number from them and used it for our camp, and it actually worked out great, as I'll show you when we look at the budget. We initially offered aftercare, which is the second to last bullet point. The idea behind aftercare was if parents can't make it to pick up their child at 3 o'clock, they could stay with us until 5 o'clock. There wouldn't necessarily be any instruction during that time. It would be more along the lines of let's get together and watch a movie or free play, or if you want to work on the stuff that you learned during that day, that'd be great, you know, like further enhance your robot or further do mobile development. You could work on that, that'd be great. But there was no formal instruction. However, we had, I think it was possibly 0 people sign up for aftercare, so we decided against offering aftercare this summer. So it wasn't even in our registration packet. Finally, the application for admission. So again, we piggyback off of existing documents that the CARE summer camp used and basically stole all their documents and changed the name. There was a basic registration information, you know, so student details, parent details, emails, address. We needed permission to photograph. We needed medical information. So, you know, do you have any allergies? What is your insurance? We had a small, almost like contract for them to sign that would absolve us of some responsibilities. If you're interested in that, I could always get you a copy. And that was essentially it as far as the application goes. It was about, I want to say, 4 or 5 pages. And again, if you'd like to take a look at that, I could always get that for you. So all that stuff, all the applications were mailed into me at the high school. I would enter all the information into a spreadsheet, eventually make a deposit with the board office. I think I just made literally 2 deposits over the course of collecting the applications. And we just used that account to order all our supplies with and pay for those things, and also for our payroll. So I'll show you all that stuff later though. So I think the hardest part, honestly, to putting together a STEAM camp or a STEM camp, whatever you decide to call it, was figuring out what the schedule was going to be. And I cannot take credit for this color-coded masterpiece. This is my co-director Martin's handiwork. So this is the original schedule. I think the new one that you have in the handout section has been modified slightly, and I'm actually going to switch over to that so you can see the new one. So sorry if you hear dogs barking in the background. That will stop momentarily, I promise. So, so on the spreadsheet here, the very first thing that we did was a warm-up activity, and the warm-up activity was a 15-minute ice-breaking activity. Hold on one second, I'll try to calm that down. Okay, sorry about that. So the first activity that we did once all the campers were gathered was a 15-minute kind of icebreaker, warm-up, get the brain working activity. So it was either, the first one was just an introduction, and I remember we just had the campers ordered. They ordered themselves either by, you know, the age or by height, and it wasn't, or, you know, not by talking, just by doing it. The second intro was giving them a bunch of index cards, a pile of index cards, and having them see who could build the tallest tower out of the index cards. The third day was unfortunately giving them paper and telling them to build paper airplanes. Maybe not the smartest of decisions, but seeing whose airplane could fly the furthest. We actually did not do that warm-up on the Thursday, the penny aluminum foil boat challenge, just because we thought logistically getting kiddie pools in there with water might not be the greatest of ideas. So we scrapped that. I can't remember what exact activity we used on Thursday, but all of these activities were just found by, you know, Googling either steam warm-up activities, steam ice-breaking activities, something like that. There's a whole laundry list of things out there. Friday, we did not do the Solo Cup Teamwork Challenge. We had our counselors on Thursday. We tasked them with coming up with an icebreaker or a warm-up, and they ran the warm-up on Friday. We actually were not responsible for that. So as you can see further by looking at the schedule, we broke up into 3 different segments. So we had a grade 2 through 3 segment, a grade 4 and 5 segment, and a grade 6 through 8 segment. And within those, we also broke up into 3 different class types.
I'm listening.
We had a robotics class type, and all the robotics stuff is in green. We had a programming / game development / mobile development, which is in blue or light blue. And then we had an animation class, which was in red. So every class that you see, either green, blue, or red, that was an hour and 20 minutes. Initially, that was not the case. I believe initially it was either an hour and 30 or an hour and 35. But what we found was, A, that's a fairly long time to have individual class sessions, and B, if you see from 2:10 to 3 o'clock, there's a STEAM craft. We found that that activity was actually running long, and we had to rush things, and it didn't seem like we were getting the most benefit out of that, so we decided to give that more time. So that was something that we did, I believe, after Monday's session. When we brainstormed about Tuesday, we got together and we said we need to cut some time from the classes and move some time over to the STEAM craft. So most of the time, everybody was working on the same STEAM craft, but there were times when we broke out, and I could talk about that. So everybody loves ice cream, so everybody on the first day did ice cream in a bag, and that was basically the science experiment of creating your own ice cream. And so Mr. Dempsey, the physics teacher, ran that. The next day, there were marshmallow shooters. So almost everybody, grades 2 through 5, did marshmallow shooters. So they created marshmallow shooters out of PVC pipe and literally had a battle after they did that and shot each other with mini marshmallows. So there was targets as well. They had target practice, etc. And everybody wore goggles, so it was fairly safe. And they're just mini marshmallows, so it was okay. At least we thought so, and it worked out fine. There were some people in grades 6 through 8, as you could see, who did the learning to solder. So we weren't sure about that. This was basically everybody in grades 6 through 8 first exposure to soldering. Soldering can be scary for some people, especially in grades 6 through 8. The burning of hands is a serious thing. And it happened with a couple campers, but they weren't serious and ran them under some ice water for 5 minutes, and they were back in business. But we were wondering if that was going to fly, and we were wondering if that was going to be popular, but kids really, really enjoyed it. We bought these little kits, these learn to solder kits that were like badges, and basically all they did, they had LEDs that lit up in certain patterns. But once a kid soldered it, they were free to take it home, which was nice. We tried to stay away from things that were like total group projects where if they built something, then you had to decide who was going to take that home. We liked the fact that everybody could take something home. So that's why we decided on those small soldering kits. So that went over pretty well, we have to say. If we look at the third day, we did water bottle rockets. So every camper was asked to bring in a 2-liter soda bottle. And we used that. We filled it with water with a bicycle pump and launched that off a little stand that we built. And in grades 6 through 8, they did something a little bit different. So they were building, it says here, a brain game. That actually changed. They were building model rockets. So instead of building water rockets, they built model rockets with model rockets kits. And every camper had their own model rocket. And at the end of Thursday, we went outside and had beautiful weather, and we launched the rockets. So we had 3 launch pads, and we were coordinating launches. 2 launch pads, none of the launches worked, so everybody had to line up behind 1 launch pad. So that was bad. No matter how much you plan, sometimes everything goes wrong. But I think everybody got to launch their rocket, and they loved that part. So that was fun. on Friday. Friday we had, well, Thursday and Friday, depending on who you are, we had brush bots. So brush bots were the head of a toothbrush, so the bristle end of a toothbrush with a motor on them and a little small battery. And basically, you connect the battery. Once you connect the battery, we didn't have a switch to turn it off. It's just go time. So you connect the battery, and these brush bots literally will dance across any surface that you put them on because of the small motor that's there. So kids created their own brush bots. They designed their brush bots. They decorated their brush bots. You know, they put heads on them, antenna, wings, whatever. You know, they painted them. And then they eventually on Friday had a brush bot tournament where you put everybody in a quote unquote ring, and they'd go wild, and the last brush bot standing was the winner. So kids like that as well. Friday, I believe for the older people, we did rockets, but I'm also blanking on the very last activity that we did Friday in grades 6 through 8. But like I said, I've got more details on all of this stuff if you're interested. This is our end schedule that we did. If I can go through the classes really quickly. So again, we had a robotics segment. In grades 2 through 3, we worked with Ozobots, and I don't know if you're familiar with Ozobots or not. They're very, very small robots. They look like this right here if you're looking at my screen. They literally fit in the palm of your hand. I know you can't tell just by looking at that picture, but they're very, very tiny. And these robots were absolutely perfect for grades 2 through 3. All you need to program these is colored markers. So literally, the instructions are passed to the robot via color markers. You draw a pattern on either the floor, on a piece of paper, on the sheets that they provide for you, and the robot will perform certain tasks. So they were great for grades 2 through 3. Grades 2 through 3 in programming, we used a lot of the code.org materials. So we used a mixture of the unplugged stuff. So anywhere from code relays to dancing to playing cards, they absolutely loved it. And I think sometimes they like the unplugged activities even more than the plugged in drag and drop coding activities. So that's what we did for programming in grades 2 through 3, followed the code.org curriculum. And by the way, I've got slides for every single grade for all the programming stuff. If you're interested in that, you could just email me and I'll be glad to pass that along. Finally, animation. I can't speak too much about what happened in the animation because I was completely hands-off in that. We had our school television producer and television teacher do the animation session. He brought over a number of his Mac editing stations into the school's media center, and the kids were working on shooting their own video and then editing that down into a movie. And they were asked to bring in, you know, their favorite dolls or characters or action figures or whatever from home, and they were involved in brainstorming, writing out scripts, and eventually shooting and editing their own movies. So that was grades 2 through 3. If we go down a little further, the grades 4 through 5, again, it's more of the same with the video and animation. The robotics now moved over to Lego Mindstorms, and I'll talk about Mindstorms when I get to the supplies. We had our own supply of Lego Mindstorms, so we did not have to buy anything, which was lovely. We had a lot of kits. We were able to give, I think, let's see, 2 or 3 campers per kit probably. And from Monday to Wednesday, I would say it was just tasking the kids with solving different problems. So, you know, following a maze, following a line, picking up an obstacle and bringing it back to a starting point, et cetera, et cetera. And then Thursday and Friday, we moved over to Sumo Bots. So essentially building a robot and programming it so that it would stay inside of a circle and quote unquote fight other robots and be the last robot standing. That was the goal. Grades 4 through 5 in programming also used the code.org curriculum, but obviously grade level. So we used the code.org for grades 4 through 5 or 4 through 6. I have all the slides for that as well. It was a mixture of plugged and unplugged activities. and it was mostly through the drag and drop editor, not so much with the actual typing in of instructions. I didn't know how much exposure they had previously, and I didn't think that bringing them directly into syntax-based languages where they had to type the code would have been such a good idea. It ended up working out great, and I think those people are going to have a leg up next year, hopefully, or this summer if they take the camp. Because grades 6 through 8 in programming, we did App Inventor, and that was fantastic. I think that went over really, really well. We were lucky enough to have, I want to say, at least 20 old Android phones that I updated the operating system with and installed the App Inventor app that allowed, the companion app that allows you to download everything onto the phone so the kids can test their apps out on the phone. If you've not seen MIT App Inventor before, it basically looks like this. It is another drag and drop kind of block-based code environment. There is very little typing, so very little syntax errors, which was great. Kids built at least 5 apps during the course of the week. Everything from just photo pickers to games to media players, etc. So they had a blast with that. The video, again, is more of the same. And robotics, again, was Lego robots. It was a little bit more advanced with more advanced tasks. And again, that also added in a battle royal. So I've talked about the crafts already. That's how we ended the day. So the day went from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock every day, with lunch being 45 minutes. It usually took them about 15 minutes to eat and about 30 minutes to run around and exhaust themselves. And we also had one break during the day for 10 minutes at 10:35. So as well, I'll talk about this later. So that was our schedule. You all have a copy of that in the handout section. This was basically the final schedule, except some of the warm-up activities did change and some of the STEAM crafts changed as well. Go back over the presentation. Okay, so looking at budget. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me as we go. So the budget, there were 43 paid campers. Each camper was $250 each for that 1 week time. So our revenue coming in was almost $11,000. We had 2 camp directors, so myself and Martin Dempsey, and we were paid $1,500 each. This entire camp took a lot of planning. I mean, there was a lot of work, I would say, from the end of March all the way up until June when school let out, and then we got together at least 3 or 4 times over the summer for more planning. So when you break that all down and the time that we spent during the camp, I know $1,500 might seem like a lot, but it was really, I mean, it was a bargain. And I don't know, I didn't work it out to how much we'd be getting paid an hour, but it was very, very, very tiny, I would imagine. So I taught the programming section. Martin, the other co-director, taught the robotics section. So even though he's a physics teacher, he has a lot of experience with robotics, so he taught that section. We had one other lead teacher. He was the television and media teacher at the high school, or still is. And he was considered a lead teacher just because he had a section all to himself. So he was paid $1,200. And then we had a floating teacher. That teacher is a computer teacher down at the elementary level. So she sees grades 2 through 5. So she was mainly with grades 2 through 3. Anywhere they went, she went. So she went to the animation section, the programming section, and the robotics section with them. So just helping out, because I had never taught at that level before, and I don't think that Martin had either. So that was the one section we were a little worried about. She also evolved into kind of our social media manager. She was taking a lot of pictures, posting things on Twitter, updating the district about progress. So that was actually really, really nice to have. I think this year, if we keep the same staff, she may move up to be a lead teacher as well. I don't know where that will leave Martin and I. I mean, we'll still be directors. I don't know if we'll be teaching as much as we did last year. But that was essentially what everybody was responsible for as far as teachers. We had 6 counselors. So the counselors are unique. I will talk about, or maybe not that unique, but I'll talk about them on the next slide. We basically saw what minimum wage was. We paid a dollar over minimum wage, so we paid $9.50 an hour each, which we thought was a fair wage. The counselors were fantastic. We communicated with them via email over the course of the summer. We had one meeting where they just came in early on the first Monday of the camp. So we probably came in an hour before camp started just to talk about what our vision of the camp looked like, what they were going to be responsible for, etc. And they ran with it and were fantastic. So I'll talk about them in a little bit. And then supplies. So supplies, the approximate number, and I know it seems like a very specific number, but I'm sure I'm forgetting something along the way. Well, there's a slide dedicated to the supplies, so we'll talk about each of these things. But around, I would say, $1,500 to $2,000 for supplies. And that, of course, depends on how much you have on hand. We were able to utilize a lot of the stuff from our various programs that we have. So we have a middle school that has a robotics club. I obviously teach computer science classes, and we have a Hackspace club that has soldering irons and things like that. So we were able to use a lot of the stuff that we have. So we ended up with a profit of almost $2,000. I don't know where that money goes. That money seems to be sitting in our account. It doesn't. We were afraid that that money would be rolled over into some miscellaneous line item in the board's budget. It seems like we still have that money and can use that money for next year, which is fantastic. So we're not starting at a zero balance. I am not an expert on how budgets and board budgets and things like that work. I don't know if your school would be the same way or if it would roll up into the budget. We were worried it would, but it still seems like it's there for us. So we have $2,000 to start off next year, which is great. We'll move on to the next slide. So, employees. I've gone over a lot of this stuff already, so I'll skip through most of it. As far as the co-directors and lead teachers, that was myself and Martin. Additional lead teacher, Andrew Zaborny, who teaches media and TV. Support teacher was Paige Bestoff, who was floating around with the grades 2 through 3. And then the counselors. So the counselors were the opportunity where we saw that we can try to give the 7 girls in the camp a lot of older female role models to look up to. These were mostly girls in my computer science program, either current students or former students. And if there were only 7 girls in the camp this summer, we'll have to see how it works out this summer coming up, to see if that had an impact or not, to see if that gave the girls a role model and say, wow, we really can do this stuff, let's tell our friends about it. But like I said, the counselors were fantastic. We could not have asked for better counselors. And all we did was we just asked students that we enjoyed spending time with, that were knowledgeable on the subject matter, that we thought were positive role models as far as computer science went, that saw their major as either computer science, computer engineering, any kind of science field. We had one kind of art/computer science major who's on the fence. We had a former student who is going to Cornell come back with, and actually this was the summer before her first year in Cornell. So that was fantastic to use her. And then one son of a Spotswood High School teacher who I had never met before but turned out to be fantastic as well. So our counselors were former students, current students, and one son of a Spotswood High School teacher. They were juniors, seniors, or freshmen in college, or going to be freshmen in college. I think it was the perfect age. I would not change anything going into next year. So from an employee standpoint, I think our employees were fantastic. Supplies. So like I said, we're lucky enough to have a lot of this stuff on hand. I'll try to discuss what was on hand and what wasn't. So We had a media center that had about 20 dedicated computers in it. Our TV teacher also brought over Macs from the high school so that the kids could edit their videos on there. We had a dedicated computer lab that had about 25 seats in it, and we also had computer carts. We used the computer carts in the cafeteria, which was where we did the robotics unit, because it was just a nice wide open space. And all of the computer carts had the Lego software on them, and that was where we used the computer carts. So that was used in the cafeteria. We have Wi-Fi access throughout all of the schools, basically in every room. So that was kind of critical. We needed to have that. Next, Lego Mindstorm. So between myself and the robotics club, we have about 23, 24 kits. There's also 3 kits that they have at the elementary school for the gifted and talented program. So since it was the summer and nobody was using them, we were allowed to use all of the kits. So we did not have to pay for one single Lego Mindstorm kit. That would have been cost prohibitive because those kits run about $330 a kit. So if we had to buy those kits, that would have been bad. Again, Android cell phones. So I was lucky enough one day to go back into our technology director's office, and he had a pile of old Android phones. These were phones that our supervisors were using, and superintendents and principals, that had been old, so they were about to recycle them, which basically means throw them away. And he asked me if I wanted the cell phones. And honestly, I wasn't doing any Android programming in my classes at the time, but I took them anyway. And it was a very, very lucky thing that I did, because those turned out to be fantastic for the app inventor portion of the class, of the camp. So kids were able to make apps on the computer, download to their phone, and see how they worked on their phones. That, again, was a tremendous success. It could not have worked out any better. I plugged in the phones every night. I had a bunch of chargers that I either borrowed or collected, and that way, by the time we got in the morning, everything was ready to go again. The one thing robotics-wise that we did buy were Ozobots. And like I said, this is what Ozobots look like. I can't remember exactly how many Ozobots we bought. I know at the bottom of the budget there is a number here. So $60 a kit for 10 kits, $600. I don't know if that's completely accurate. I remember that we did order them from Barnes & Noble just because we had an account there through the school, and we could only order supplies with vendors that were pre-approved and that we had accounts with. So we were a little limited there. It would have been nice to go out to Amazon or other places, but we had to order through Barnes & Noble. So we got Ozobots. They were fantastic. I believe that Ozobots have evolved since the time that we bought them. We found them, just the only downside was that they were a little limiting in the sense that they didn't have a lot of sensors on board, and you really couldn't plug in additional sensors onto an Ozobot. I believe that that's changed, and I believe that they, out of the box, they come with more things that they can do now, and they could respond to their environment a little bit more rather than just reading in colors. So if you're doing robotics for a younger age, I would definitely suggest Ozobots. We like them a lot. Back. Rockets. So this was 2 things, right? We had water bottle rockets, and the only thing there, we told kids to bring in 2-liter bottles, so that was free. My co-director Martin had a bunch of bicycle pumps and stands that he already had created in his spare time, so that was free as well. We paid for model rocket kits, so we tried to find the simplest kits that were out there. We had to buy the kits, the engines, and I believe we bought 1 launch pad, and we had 2 launch pads that were donated by other teachers who just happened to have them. So that was an expense for the rockets. We bought campers water for during the break and for lunch, so they had those mini bottles of water, and we had a big like refrigerated chest in the cafeteria where kids were allowed to store their lunches. So kids brought their own lunch. The only thing that we provided was water, so they brought lunch and snacks. And like I mentioned, the STEAM craft on the first day was ice cream. So we had to buy all the supplies for ice cream. So basically the morning of the camp, we were in ShopRite raiding it for their supplies, you know, from sprinkles to hot fudge to milk to ice. All of those things were needed for, and salt, lots of salt to make the ice cream. The next thing that we had to buy were the soldering kits. So we had a bunch of soldering irons. We had a bunch of solder, a bunch of desolder. The only thing that we didn't have were the kits. So an expense, I can't remember exactly where we bought the kits at. There's a bunch of different suppliers online, but we thought it was important that each child who was going to be soldering had their own thing that they could actually take home with them and say, hey, look, mom and dad, here's what we made in camp today. We tried to make it as much like, you know, show off to your parents to kind of to get buy-in, like, hey, we made this, hey, we launched this rocket, hey, we built this app, etc. Index cards and paper for various things, like paper for a number of things, paper airplanes, for a lot of the unplugged CS activities in the programming section, index cards for building the tallest tower, etc. We got a lot of that stuff through school. Some of it we had to buy, but not a lot. We put in a fairly significant Home Depot order because we had an account through them for the PVC pipe, and that was for the marshmallow shooters that we built. And basically, all the pipe was cut ahead of time by my co-director Martin, and the kids just basically had to follow plans, put together the pipe, and then go target shooting with the marshmallows. So PVC pipe was a supply that we got through Home Depot. And then I talked about the brush bots earlier. The brush bot supplies were purchased online, and those are basically batteries, small motors, and really cheap toothbrushes that we could just break so that we could just use the brush head on them. And that, I don't know if that's an exhaustive list of the supplies, but those are the major supplies and the places where I could see that there would be major expenses in running your own camp. Obviously, you need computers and computer labs and or computer carts. Those things are massively important. So if you don't have those things, that would be a tremendous expense. Things that you might not think about, or maybe you were better than us and you would think about. Allergies. Luckily enough, we had an allergy section on our registration packet. So with allergies, it was needed because we did that ice cream STEAM craft, and so some kids couldn't have chocolate syrup, some kids couldn't have vanilla extract, some kids couldn't have cherries so on their sundae. So all of these things were important to know, obviously. We went outside, so sometimes during lunch kids were allowed to play outside. We went outside to launch water bottle rockets or to launch rockets, the model rockets. So sometimes kids had seasonal allergies, so we had to be aware of all of that. So that was important to put on the registration packet just to find out if kids had allergies or not. Permission to photograph. Most often we get this permission to photograph during the school year. This is kept track of in our student information system. But we just wanted to make sure that we looked at that information, because after looking at it, there were parents who did not want their child photographed. So we were just photographing for social media purposes, for brochures that we might make for this summer coming up. Since we had never run a camp before, we thought it would be important to have those pictures, and it was important to know who we could photograph and who we couldn't photograph. So we were surprised that there were actually students who were not able to be photographed, but we respected that, and we had that information because of our student information system, and we just cross-referenced that, which was a bit laborious, but it was okay. One thing we didn't think about much at all was we knew we needed a sign-in and a sign-out table where parents could drop off and pick up, but the staffing of that table, so both in the morning and then in the afternoon, and that's where that teacher who was kind of floating with the second and third grade came in. Eventually she was key in manning that sign-in, sign-out table, and eventually that task fell on our counselors. So we'd have all our counselors positioned at the sign-in table. They'd sign in the campers, and then a group of campers would be walked down to the cafeteria where we held our brainstorming sessions. So campers were not really left alone to their own devices too much, so that even though the entire school was ours to use if we wanted to, there was a lot of distance between rooms, and we didn't want the campers getting lost or running off, or just basically getting lost within the school somewhere. So they were all walked back and forth from the sign-in to the sign-out section, and they were escorted from each of their classes to the break, or to lunch, or to the other classes. So they were manned full times by all the camp counselors, and they did a fantastic job with that. I think that's one of the parent things that you'll see in the surveys, or maybe not seeing, but I'll be sure to mention about the sign-in and the sign-out table. So I'll talk about that in a second. So like I mentioned earlier, we sent out 2 surveys. One was on the last day of camp. That was the Friday, and we sent that to all the campers. So they actually completed that during the programming section of the last day. So in my unit, that's when they answered their student survey. And then the parent survey was sent probably 2 or 3 days after camp ended. So we tried to get their feedback on the camp. So I believe that these are most, if not all, of the questions that we asked. For the students, they were basically answering on a 1 to 5 scale. Some things were agree, disagree. For the parents, they were typically 1 to 10 scale, or agree, disagree, strongly disagree, or neutral. Tried to make it for the campers more kid-friendly, and for the parents get a little bit more nuanced. There was also a free-form part, like, do you have any suggestions, or do you have any comments or anything like that? So I'm not going to bother reading off all of the questions to you. You can see them in front of you. And again, you have the presentation in the handout section, so you can go back and take a look at these. I would be more than willing to share these. We did this on Google Forms, obviously, so I'd be more than willing to share the form with any of you if you were interested in taking a look at what the form looks like. But I would like to go over a couple of the results, so that's going to be on the next slide. So I'll just start out by saying that we were really satisfied with how the camp went. We really couldn't have been happier. We were nervous about a couple of things, like grades 2 through 3. How are they going to respond to a programming unit? How are they going to respond to the Ozobots? We were initially nervous about running a camp for 2 weeks. That didn't pan out last summer because we only had to run it for 1 week. But we will say that our positive attitudes were matched by both the campers and the parents, which was very, very nice to see. So 98% of the students said that they would return to camp next year. That was fantastic. We had them rank their favorite activities, and robotics, which was probably not a big surprise that came in first. They really enjoyed the STEAMcraft part of it second, programming was third, and animation was fourth. I would say the only section that really received mixed feedback, so these were things that were received, from a scale of 1 to 5, some of them received 1s and 2s, and 3s with limited 4s and 5s, and that was the animation section. I will discuss why on the next slide, at least why I think it was. I know that myself and the other co-director put a lot of effort into our sections of the camp, the programming section and the robotics section. We didn't think too much about the animation section. We let that be led by the expert in that section. And I think that person did a fantastic job, but I think it was really a technology thing. Like, I don't think that we had enough Macs and editing stations over in the media center. And I think that a lot of kids were sitting on their hands waiting for animation stations to be open and waiting for editing stations to be open. So a lot of campers were bored during that time and found it, that's literally what their comments were. There was like, it was too much of a classroom environment, and we were kind of bored during that session. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that was our only negative feedback for the camp from the students' perspective. As far as parents go, Parents, again, very, very positive about it. Their campers enjoyed it. 95% said they would like to return next summer. 84% said it increased their child's interest and or knowledge of STEM fields and activities. And finally, the big thing that we really were floored by is that 100% would like to be notified when camp registrations opened for this summer coming up. So obviously, we collected email addresses. Everybody has been notified about the camp that we have coming up for this summer for the last 2 weeks in August, and registrations are slowly coming in as we speak. Finally, so lessons learned or questions that we still have. So the big thing was the animation section. We need to get more hardware so that kids aren't sitting around waiting for machines to open up. We might want to devote even more time to an afternoon STEAM craft or STEM craft. We found that, we initially were, I think, doing that for 35 minutes, then we bumped it up to 50 minutes. I think we could probably safely spend an hour on the afternoon STEM craft. Kids really enjoyed it. It was their second favorite activity. It was hands-on. Not that everything wasn't hands-on, but this was even more so. And who doesn't like launching rockets or shooting mini marshmallows at each other? So we might want to devote more time to that in the future. And I think that the biggest question, and the one that's still outstanding for when we do this summer coming up, is how do we make sure that we keep the camp fresh? Meaning, how do we make sure that the kids who did the camp last summer and that are attending this summer aren't doing exactly the same activities? So we're still in the planning stages with that. We're toying around with the idea of, instead of having like a programming unit and a robotics unit and a animation unit, that we kind of just have theme weeks where we present the campers with a problem, and their days are spent solving that problem through the lens of programming and robotics and animation or forensics or art or whatever you have. So we're looking at that to try to keep the camp fresh. Also, if we can't do that, we're looking at just offering different activities. So possibly a unit on web design, possibly a unit on more advanced programming that doesn't use a drag and drop environment, advanced robotics. So whether that be VEX robotics, so we have some old VEX kits, or just doing advanced stuff in Legos. So there's a number of issues, right? Trying to keep the camp fresh from one year to the next. And we also hope to offer the camp for 2 weeks this year. So how would we keep the camp fresh from week 1 to week 2? So those are the big outstanding questions that we still have. I'm seeing that we're running up against time, but that is, I believe, the end of the presentation. So I am more than willing to answer any question that you have.
Annually make it available to the students.
Great, thank you. All right, does anyone have any questions?
Correct. Yeah, if you hold on a minute, I'll go into it and make sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Gary, for this informative presentation. If there aren't any questions, I'd like to thank you all for attending. Just to remind you, the presentation that Gary just gave, along with the camp schedule that he showed you, are located under the handouts. There's also a little bit of an informational handout about the Building CS project that is sponsoring this webinar. Just another reminder is we did record this webinar, and we will be sending the link along to attendees and anyone who registered. So if you wish to view it and go back over anything that Gary said, you can feel free to do that. Gary also mentioned that he does have additional information if you would like to reach out to him, and he provided his email in the beginning of the presentation. Along with the link to the recording of the webinar, you will receive a brief survey about this event. If you could take the time to complete the survey, we would greatly appreciate your feedback, and as soon as I have received responses, I will send out your PD certificate. So once again, if there are no questions, last chance.
I was just wondering if you had any experience with the Spark Balls, as far as the Ozobots instead of the Spark Ball.
I have not had any experience with Spark Balls, so I can't speak to them. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. I just wondered if there was I used Spark Balls in my school, so I wondered if there was something to compare the difference. So that was all.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Gary, for an informative presentation. And I look forward to seeing some of you at future PD events. Thank you very much. Good night.
You know, we don't have to go back and forth. I will